Okay, so in this show here, we are doing like a language learning proof of concept. So you could have a show here where we need to find the right object for and place it here on this pedestal or in this zone to be rewarded with learning vocabulary. So this could be learning. We could learn a foreign language, or we could learn other technical vocabulary. We're out here in a show in a Simmetri horizon called On the Moon. You can find it here under Horizons on the Moon. I thought it was kind of a cool place to do some learning. You've got our sun in the background and Earth in the near distance, properly scaled. And obviously you can see that this in present time what it looks like. And in VR, of course, you'll move around and fly around and kind of wander all over the moon. And you might have a lot of these different modules to do your testing. And so you'd grab things and say, I think that's it. No, that's not it. And then, oh, I think it's this one. And you're rewarded with, yes, indeed it is. I'll show you how it's built. And then I'll show you how to build it. So what you basically have here is two objects, each of which have a grabbable interaction on them, grabbable fixed. They have a physics rigid body, meaning that they are going to move in space. This one actually, its rigid body is allows it to fall to the ground. That could be set to false too. I kind of like the motion that they undergo when they are set to a rigid body that is active but immovable, and then they have the grabbable interaction on it, which allows them to be grabbed by kind of the laser interaction controls in VR. And so people will be able to fly around with these objects and test them and play with them. So those are the two objects that you have in front of you, and then you've got a label, and that label is essentially connected to this what I think is a hexagon or a heptagon at this point. Septagon? Heptagon. Which is a tube entity with only 7 subdivisions. You could make it whatever you wanted. Pentagon's pretty rad. That'd be kind of cool. Maybe you start at the triangle, and as the words get harder, you go up until you get full vocabulary at a perfect circle. But whatever suits your fancy. I thought this was a cool way to do it. I'm going to go with Pentagon. And so then it's got a label that's floating up here. And this is a label that is here under the UI. And this label does a nice thing what's called look at. So every frame, it goes and finds the camera and looks at it, so that no matter where you go, you're never really behind. Never behind that text. It's always looking at you, which is helpful. So that all the labels, when you look out at all your vocabulary words, will all be facing you. So that's the effect of this UI one. And I picked a font, and you can pick any font you want, and put different material on it and color it and all of that. And I sized it. And then the magic all happens in this script right here, which is a trigger. And inside of this trigger is a piece of code, and we're going to build this in a second. Anytime you're seeing these unique IDs, this is us going and accessing one of these objects in the space. So the tube entity is that pentagonal base, and we're going to make that thing glow. Illumination is actually the amount of illumination on this heart. We'll see that you'll see that it glows once it's in there, so it glows. So we're going to animate that. We're going to make this glow, and we're going to make these particles emit. So that's the 3 things we're doing in this. So you'll see this makes the base glow, this makes the heart glow, and this makes the particles emit. And so this is the base. It basically looks like this. Right. And so I'm going to just show you here. You can always put in comments in your scripts, 2 hyphens. Make a comment in Lua, and I will say, this makes face glow, hyphen. This makes the heart glow. Slightly different effects. This, of course, is touching the object color, just kind of a baseline color, and then this goes and actually touches the material. Don't worry too much about that at this point. We're just going to make things look cool and get more advanced as we go. This makes the particles first / poof. Okay. Very good. And you don't, this is even more advanced than we would need, but this is, it actually animates the color value. And so you'll see that it happens over the course of a short amount of time. In 0.1 seconds, it'll animate up to a glowing effect. And you could make this even take longer by adding a certain amount. Oops, excuse me. I accidentally put a space in there. And so you could make this really long, like we could make this take 3.3 seconds to get to, let's say, 30. Let's see if it takes longer. You can see it taking longer to glow, and that's kind of nice. I left it in there so that you can kind of see it. Anytime you want to get back to that script, you're going to right-click on the trigger in the hierarchy, or right-click on the trigger in the space and hit Edit Code. Here you can hit Edit Code. There's a lot of ways in. And the script here, you can see there's the on-enter function. That's the function when something enters into this trigger zone. And you've noticed that this trigger is a sphere as well. So it's sort of kind of this like force field, and you kind of want to position it over your object. And what else to show you before sort of building it? There you go. There's your script. So let's build this up from the beginning. I'm going to save it, and then I'm going to hit File, New. All right. Well, here we go. So first off, let's go to the moon. We're going to click on Horizons, and we're going to hit On the Moon. Takes it a little while, to just a quick second to kind of get everything in place. There's this rich star map, an accurate galaxy Milky Way star map that loads in, and pretty beautiful. And then you got your Earth and the sun here. So we're going to begin by bringing in our test objects and getting them ready, and then we'll finish with the whole base and all of its interactions. So let's bring in 2 objects. So to bring in an object from Google Poly, I have first downloaded an object, and I can leave it in the zip file. So Google Poly will have a lot of 3D items that you can use for your mesh. And if you want to search for it, you can press Control, Shift, and P, and you can search Google Poly for, I could just say food, and I'll pull the screen in so you can see it. So I could download hot dogs, download OBJ, download, and I'll say hot. This is in my 3D models Google Poly folder. I'll say hot dogs __, and then I go Chris Ross. This way, because all the things on here have Creative Commons attributions, I'm required to attribute that this hot dog model came from Chris Ross. And so now that it's downloaded, I'll find it in Simmetri. We'll go to File, Import Optimized, and we'll look for Hot Dogs by Chris Ross. I'll hit Open, and there we go. We've got some moon hot dogs. And then I will load in another one. So I've already loaded something else in from Google Poly. We'll go ahead and get the heart. So let's see here, heart, Poly by Google. We've got a heart. I may flip over to, well, it depends on how you want, where you want to be. There's obviously directional light coming in from here. If you kind of want this background, that might be nice. It's fine with me. Rotate this heart. That looks good as a heart. Put it in position. And so now these objects won't be grabbable until we add a rigid body to them, and then they'll be grabbable and movable in VR. So we're going to add a rigid body to each of these objects now. And the rigid body is the physics that allows this to be moved by gravity. For example, now if I press play, these things won't fall. But if I add a rigid body to them, I select them, and I come up here, and on the top level, I'm going to add an attribute, which is called the rigid body attribute, and there it falls. But I'll go back to stop time, so it resets the position. I want it to be movable. I want it to, have physics, but I don't want it to actually move. So I want it to kind of stay floating in the air. So I put that move on the rigid body. I selected movable false. So there we go. We've got this object, and then the last thing to do with that object is put the interaction grabbable fixed and place that on it. So now in present time, in Simmetri, it'll kind of mimic what VR might look like, except we don't, in this case, I'm not putting you in anything that'll move around, but you can move objects around. You see how those hot dogs don't collide with this? The heart goes straight through it. That's because the hot dogs don't yet have a rigid body. But that's kind of the effect I want, the ability to move objects around through the space. And in VR, that works out really nicely. Let's do the same for the hot dogs, and we'll actually bring them back down to earth a little bit. And for them, we're going to, let's do all this in stop time. So there's no green on the edges. We're fully stopped, and everything we position is going to stay where it stays. So on the hot dogs, I'll do the same thing. I'll come up here to the top level. And let's first of all just make sure we name it something memorable, because it came in, but it didn't come in with its title correct. So we'll call it hot dogs. And then this is kind of like naming layers in a Photoshop project. And on this one, we're just going to call it heart. And we'll use capital, first letter capital, and then make sure there's no spaces at the end, because these are the names you're going to be testing for later on in that trigger to make sure the right one comes in to give you the reaction. And so hot dogs, we've got renamed. We renamed heart. And let's go and let's add the rigid body to hot dogs. We'll add rigid body under this, add attributions, add the rigid body, and we're going to make it immovable. And now when we press play, it's not going to fall, but this heart will collide with it. Very nice. And then we just need to make the hot dogs movable. So we'll press interactions, grabbable, fixed. And now hot dogs will move and collide into heart. Heart will move and collide into hot dogs. Great. So now we've got our two objects that we're going to test, and we're going to now build our, what should we call it? Our pedestal, or testing pedestal, we'll call it. So we're gonna go to the entities, and we're going to go to tube to build that base. And so what you do is you click and drag before releasing. Then that gives you your outer radius. Then you release the left click, and you form your inner radius. No fingers are clicked, you're just moving. Then you click again, and now you're going to control your height. And on this step, before you do, use the mouse scroll wheel and scroll down to kind of sample a few different subdivision amounts. I'm going to go with this like hexagon look and release it. Now, it doesn't matter how you draw it necessarily, because you can always double click it, and that'll bring up its shape property in the properties, and you can manipulate the shape here. So I can change its height, I could change its outer radius and its inner radius, and I liked a radius about like so, because when I pressed play, the objects kind of like landed in that. They like land in that hole really well. I'll show you here. Kind of like that effect where they sort of like nudged in. You see something there. We don't want this pedestal to move around necessarily, so let's also make its rigid body fixed. So that's rigid body movable false. And so now when I move the heart, it kind of interacts with it, and then it can kind of land in this depression there. And same with the hot dogs. They'll sort of, there you go. They'll kind of fight until they get where they're going. And that looks good. So we now have our pedestal, and let's attach a label to the pedestal. So wherever, if the pedestal goes somewhere, we'll move along with it. And this label is under UI/game, and you'll click label, and then you're going to select something that the label connects to. And so we're going to connect it to our pedestal. And you see there's a little small little label here. Don't worry, we'll get that nice and big and looking good. So it's a child. The label is a child, but meaning it's underneath the pedestal on the hierarchy over here. So we're looking in our hierarchy. We'll see that the label is now a child of it. And while we're at it, you know that this started as a tube, but it's, with subdivisions, it looks now like a hexagon. We're going to go ahead and give this a name that we can remember. And we'll call this pedestal _heart. So this will be the pedestal where our heart label is going to go. Something to know about. So now we're going to change the text from label to heart. So we're going to work on the font, the color, and the size. And here we go. So while you've selected it, you're going to select it in the hierarchy. Trying to select it in the space won't work because it's a child, unless, of course, you say select children directly, in which case, if I was close enough, I'd be able to grab it. There we go. But I'll leave select children directly off, and we'll select the children in the hierarchy. So select the label. And the thing to know is that the text shape, just like the tube entity's shape, our pedestal, is found under mesh model. If you don't see it, expand mesh model. Our shape lives here. Text changes what the word is. Right now you see label on the screen, and we're going to change that to be all caps heart. You'll see this item called name. That's how it shows up on the hierarchy, not the word that shows up. So you've got text is what shows up on the screen. Name is what shows up in the hierarchy. And there's a reason for that. It can seem a little confusing, but you'll understand as you progress why that can be useful. So the name we will call heart label. If we select our heart label and look at its shape, we can control its text, what text is displayed, which is heart. We can pick a font, but let's, just so you can kind of see it a bit more, let's go ahead and make, yeah, there we go, a bigger size. That's pretty good. And let's pick a more interesting font, maybe. Bauhaus, how about? Cool. It's kind of space age, whatever. And then let's take a look on the top level. Our color right now is this kind of neon orange or something. Let's go ahead and kind of get like a more heart-like red or something, just a little bit of maroon. Now, it's dark out in this world that we've in the moon world, so you can add what's called HDR intensity. And that is kind of the equivalent of a glow. It's sort of how much does that color reflect is the way you could think of it. So this looks really nice. We've kind of got a heart label, and it's large, and the font is cool, and it's ready to be organized. It's called heart label, and it's the child of the pedestal. So if we move the pedestal, the heart moves with it. We want to put it over here, over there. Wonderful. So now when we press play and we fly around, you'll also see that the heart label follows us, which is really nice, and that's why you'll want to use a label as often as you can. Okay, so we're looking pretty good here. Now comes the hard part, the scripting, which actually won't be that hard at all. So first, we're going to make the thing that calls the script, and we're going to use a trigger, which is kind of a spatial activator. We're going to put in a sphere. I think a sphere makes sense. You could, of course, use a box. A plane wouldn't make much sense. I mean, it might, because you have to like cross the plane. But people are sort of using like they don't know exactly where to place this. Remember that your triggers don't show up in VR, and they don't visually show up in VR, and they don't visually show up. They're kind of these invisible force fields. They don't show up in present time like this. They do in playtime, where you can demo interactions. We don't have any interactions yet. But in present time, they won't exist. And so you're kind of creating, you're assuming there's going to be a space that this object is going to land in, you know? And so this makes sense for us to have it here. So the other thing is, things have to be, you want things that are supposed to activate this trigger, and things that shouldn't activate it to not activate that trigger. So there's an attribute, like our rigid body, that's called trigger activating. Right now, the heart doesn't have it, so we're going to actually add it. So we've selected the heart. We're looking at its properties. Up here, where we added the rigid body, and we're now going to add what's called trigger activating. So trigger activating means that it will actually activate this trigger when it goes through it. And we're going to do the same for the hot dogs, because they'll probably have their own pedestal at some point. And we're going to go to trigger activating. There's something intersecting with the pedestals that I don't think should be trigger activating. Sorry, there's something interacting with the trigger that shouldn't be. And I would say that that's the pedestal. And these objects, these entities that you draw, have trigger activating on them by default. So we're actually going to remove that by going to the trigger activating attribute under the pedestal object, that tube entity. It's now called pedestal. And we'll go to this little triangle here and remove the attribute. Again, this little triangle is largely adding and removing different attributes. And those sort of give your objects different kind of characteristics. So the heart will go in and activate this, and the hot dogs will go in and activate it. But the mesh entity, if it kind of moved relative to the trigger, which it shouldn't, since it's immovable, but if it did, it's not going to cause this trigger to deactivate. Sorry, it's not going to cause the trigger to activate. Let's actually do one more thing. Let's take the trigger and make it a child of the pedestal as well. So wherever the pedestal goes, so will go the label, and so will go the pedestal. So the way that you child something is grab the words trigger and drag them over the words pedestal heart, and you'll now see this pink bounding box saying, oh, be in this scope, be my child. And now it's kind of indented, just like heart label. And we will be grabbing now the pedestal, and where we move it, so goes the trigger. Now you get this really portable item we could kind of place different places. All right, so now we've got our full trigger constructed. Things are ready to activate it, and now we just need to write a little script. I'm actually going to move the trigger up just a little bit more, so you kind of get a bit fuller. I selected in the hierarchy, kind of move it up. I just wanted a bit more space on it. I'm going to come around to the side. Often when you're constructing, you want to swing around 90 degrees to see if you're aligning things. And that's one way to do it there. So I'm feeling good. So let's write this script. So the trigger, under its properties, has some events. On init is what happens at the very first frame when you press play, and that is when the trigger initializes. We're not going to worry about that. On tick is at every frame, and in VR that's 90 times a second. Every 90 times a second you could call some function or do some script on tick. We're not going to be using that. If the object moves, you could call on move. We're also not going to be using that. It has on enter and on exit, on interact when something's inside of it, and another one called on look at. So if I look in this zone, and you can see kind of my reticle, that little circle moving around now on the hot dog. When that center point of my view, my camera's view, comes across this object, it'll call some script. We're not going to use that. I know that might be a useful one and to work with, and so keep that in mind or look at. We're going to use on enter. So if we click on enter, up comes the Lua scripting window, and we have the on enter function, which is a function of the trigger called on enter, and it passes in what's called an argument. It passes in an argument called obj. And obj is essentially the data system's access of whatever object passes into that trigger. So if this heart, when its center point, if it's trigger activating, when its center point crosses that threshold into the trigger, we're going to call this trigger's on enter function, and the variable obj is going to be referencing the heart. So if I do anything with obj, it will be speaking. It'll be a functions on this heart. So what we want to do on enter is oh, I forgot one thing. We need to put a particle emitter in here to do a poof. So let's go get our particle emitter for our poof. Emitter, particle emitter, draw it on the pedestal. We're actually going to child it to the pedestal, so grab the words particle emitter, scroll over pedestal heart, and you've now got a particle emitter that's a child of the pedestal. And one cool thing you can do with a particle emitter is under area, under the top level over here, under area, is a thing called use parent surface. And if we hit true on that, we're going to be emitting particles across kind of randomly on points along the mesh that is this entity, this tube. We don't necessarily I don't really want this thing emitting particles until we have a success. So under the particle emitter, I'm going to actually go turn off its constant continuous pulse. So this pulse under continuous is a constant pulse, and I'm going to say none, because I'm going to tell it when to emit a burst. And we're going to do that now. So we've got our script open. Again, that was the trigger on enter. We've got a script open. What are we going to do? What will we tell? Let's put a few spaces in here so that we've got a landing pad for our code. We're going to drag the icon of the particle emitter into the script window so that we can have our script talked to and from that particle emitter. So particle emitter is found by this unique ID that's kind of like the social security number of the particle emitter in a way. Particle emitters have a function on them called emit burst. So I'm going to call a function on this particle emitter by typing in the word exactly as it's stated up here, capital P, capital E, and then I put in a colon to call my function, and then I am going to say emit burst, which is lowercase e, uppercase b. That's called camel case. And then open and close parentheses. And we need to tell emit burst how many particles to emit at once. So I'm going to say 400 particles will all emit at once. And when that happens, and an object passes through, we're going to emit a burst. Again, object passes through. You see the trigger kind of glow bright. That's it telling you that it worked. And we emit a burst of 400 particles. Feel free to test different amounts. You'll eventually get to a place where it's too many for your computer. But you can emit a lot of particles before you're going to bog down your computer, up in the thousands almost. Simmetri can't handle thousands and thousands of, say, hot dogs, for example, but it could handle thousands of particles. Let's do something else on our particle emitter. Let's make the color kind of also reddish. So our particles, yeah, boom. It's working. And we still have this, and we're going to get to that in a second, the fact that it doesn't test to see if it's the heart. Let's make something else happen on this. Let's make the base glow. So there is, there's a way to really easily kind of cheat and get some glow. If I draw something and I go to interactions and I put glow on this cylinder that I just drew, if I edit the code under the glow node, glow is now added as this node. It has code on it, on press to glow up and on release to glow down, which basically looks like this. I want to steal that on press so it glows up. So I'm going to copy out the code from the on press event over here, and I'm going to paste that in the code that's on the trigger. We'll go back to our main code here. So we've got the particle emitter emitting bursts, which is working really well. Now we're going to paste in that code for glowing and do a little bit to it. So over here on this code, it's got some system of finding, labeling a variable called obj. And we're not going to do that. We're going to say base, and the base is this cylinder tube entity, our pedestal. And so we're going to need to get a hold of this pedestal. So I'm going to grab its icon and drop it in. Actually, we're going to place it right above base. So pedestal heart, we can change that name, and we're going to call that base. Oh, I put 2 equals in there. I should test code, not in playtime. But this will be fine. Base is equal to this amount. Now we just need to change where we saw obj, need to change those words to base. So I can say base right there, base, and base. So now in our code, base equals find this object, the pedestal object. Then we're going to go get our animator, and we're going to animate our base's color property. Then we're going to create a key clip on that property on the timeline. And then that clip is going to add a key, which means that it's going to animate over the course of 0.1 seconds to a base color that's 10 times its amount, which actually means, turns out, that's the glow. That's like that HDR glow we worked with. Now this could take place over the course of a lot longer time, and we'll see what that looks like. So if I'm in playtime, I should be able to drag that in, and you see this long, drawn-out glow took place over the course of 5 seconds. Now it'll take place over the course of 0.2 seconds. There, it's up really quick. That's pretty cool. So you can change kind of that timeline. And this could be times 10. It could also even be brighter. Click in the space, press space bar. So it glows bright. We could spend a long time getting up to that brightness. We could spend 4 seconds. Bonk. And I'll do one last thing here. We could make the heart glow. And I did that by, let's make the heart glow, yeah. Okay, so on the heart, not that one, our heart, we need to go find its material. Since it's a Google Blocks model, we need to like go get its material. So under mesh entity, where you might find things on its shape, you'll find its material. So let's click this hyperlink here to get to its material. And you'll see a new tab open up with this material. This is our heart, and it opens up a tab. It always keeps one open, the thing that you've selected, and then it adds a new one in if you're sort of drilling through the links. You can pin it here by clicking this little plus button, and now it'll stay because you're going to work on it for a little bit. So this is all the properties of this material, which is kind of like, you know, what base color it has, and we could kind of toggle this value. That would be fine. But what I want to do is use this illumination property and this emissive amount so we can glow. So basically we want to go from 0 to 10 or something, or even like 6.5. We'll go from 0 to 6.5. So what we want to do is now we're going to take this illumination property and grab its icon and drag that into the script and place it here. Give it a separate line. And now we're going to get that illumination's emissive amount property. So I'm going to type in illumination, exactly how it's spelled above. And I'm going to type dot, and it's always camel case, so it's a lowercase e, emissive, no space, capital A for the next word, amount. And then I'm going to have open close parentheses. Oops, never mind, sorry, forget what I said there. Illumination dot emissive amount equals 6.5. So we're going to start out with it in the world at being 0. When this script runs and the particle emitter emits its burst and the base glows up to across 4 seconds to get to 20 times its glow, we're going to also have this emissive amount jump to 6.5. We're not going to animate it just for the sake of time here, but we'll leave the script open. If I press play, now my heart should glow, and now the heart is glowing, yeah. So again, in present time, it would look like this. We've got this heart, bring it in, it's glowing. Tremendous. Not bad. That might be more glowing than you want on the base, but whatever. I'm going to delete this object in the background. We just used it to kind of to get this animated code, to get this nice fade up on the glow of the base. So I'm actually get rid of that object by kind of sweep dragging, lasso selecting it all and then hitting delete. So we've got a nice looking script here. I'm going to open it up so you can see more. We've got emit particle poof. Yeah. We've got glow the base. We've got glow the heart. And lastly, we need to do a little piece of code that tests whether it's the right word or not, because while this is cool and all, we don't want that. So let's do a little conditional test called if then. So in our code, I can't get to the trigger, obviously, because it's a child. So I need to get it over here. I can right click and hit edit code. We're going to write an if then statement. So basically what we're going to test is if we're going to test by the name. So if the object's name property, if the name is heart, run this whole script. If it's heart, run this whole success emitting, glowing script, right? But if it's anything else, don't do anything. In fact, we could also put in a little like sound that went wah wah, and then we could emit that on the else. So let's write an if-then statement, and it's going to test if the name is heart. So to do that, we write if space, and how are we going to know what to test? Well, like I said, the trigger passes us this little useful thing that says obj is the thing that crossed my threshold and is activating me. Here, I'm going to give it to you so you can use it. So obj in this case, when the heart enters, it'll be the heart, and I can test its name, and its name will send back to me a string called heart. When the hot dogs pass in, I'm going to get a name that says hot dogs. Well, actually, let me just show you that right now, just so you can see it. Print obj colon get name, and get name is a string, so it'll print, and you'll see a little printout right down here when these objects go through. Heart, hot dogs. So that's what we're testing, right? Is it heart or hot dogs? Is it heart or anything else, basically? So I'm going to leave that statement there and just comment it out. You might want to test that later, use that as a little tester later on to debug or something. But right now we're going to write an if statement, and we're going to sort of test to see if it's a heart, and then run this code if it is. So we'll write if obj colon get name, which is essentially what we did up here. We just printed that word, is equal to, and you need two equals when you're doing a test. If you're trying to set a variable, you use 1. Remember to use 2 if you're trying to test. Is it equal to? Is it greater than or equal to? You're always using double equals or greater than equals, something like that. If the name is equal to in quotes, because we're testing for a string, HEART, quote, quotation mark, capital H, EART, quote, and make sure it's the exact word that you've used, and there's no excuse me, that it's this exact word and that there's no spaces, because if it'll test it and it won't think it's heart if it comes back heart space. So make sure that's heart, no spaces. Make sure this is heart, no spaces, and it's in quotes. If the object name, if the object get its name is equal to this string type word heart, then, and it shoots this little end into automatically it places end here. We're actually going to cut this and place it at the bottom of all this script here. So that's the end of the if statement. I select all of this and tab it in. The tabs are more for organization. They're organization in Lua. I think unlike Python scripting, tabs don't count as syntax. So if the name is equal to heart, then we're going to do this: emit the particle, poof, glow the base, glow the heart, and we're done. Which means that if it's not this, we're going to do nothing. We could also write in here, before the end statement, we could write an else statement, which could be play some womp womp sound or something like that. But we're not going to use else right now. We're just gonna do nothing on the counter case. So now when we present this, the hot dogs do nothing, but the heart, voila, does something. So that is basically it. Thanks for coming on the long journey. I'm trying to think if there's anything else pretty fun to do here. You'll obviously realize that if you're going to build a bunch of these, we might want to build them a little differently. But if you're only going to build like 5 of these, you can kind of reset this. You can reset the this code quite manually. You'll need to reassign all these variables, because if you make a copy of this thing with a different word, let's say I just did an alt drag on that thing and dragged out a copy. But if I change this label, say to hot dogs, that script is still going to only be reading if it's going to be only really working for me if this is a heart that enters, and it's going to activate all these things over here. So in this script, we need to reassign all those variables. So you might come in here and rename all your names, and then you need to reassign all of these things, because this again is like a social security number. This base that's in this script over here is not mentioning this base. It's not the base underneath it, the new copy. It's talking about this old copy. And this particle emitter isn't our new particle emitter, our copied particle emitter. It's the old particle emitter. And so you'd want to then delete that, and then come in and get your new particle emitter. You'd want to, delete this. Make sure that your names stay the same, because this name is different than what came in, and it needs to be all the way through. So base is equal to our pedestal. Whoops. We can cut that and say base is equal to this find object by unique ID, and that's our new base. And then the illumination will be, let's see, our hot dog illumination property. So if you get the hot dogs property, material, get the hot dogs material, I'm going to bring in its illumination, and I will drag it in right here. That's the hot dogs illumination, which may not look right. We'll see. Let me drag the hot dogs in, how it glows. Just make sure you reassign. So then let's just see here. Does, now that the grabbable is on, things don't move the way they do when you're in editing. Now that almost didn't seem like it worked. Okay. Oh, you maybe see exactly what I did wrong here. When we copy the script, it still has the test word heart in it. I'm going to delete that, and we need to get the exact name of hot dogs. So how did I spell hot dogs? Hot dogs, all one word, no space at the end, capital D, capital H. So I'm actually just going to select it all here, hit Control C, paste it in, Control V inside of these quotes. And now I'm going to, in playtime, drag these along. It'll be much easier to drag in VR. Boom, hot dogs. We're glowing and heart. There you go. Very cool. That would be how you might make more than one. There's an even more efficient way of writing the code, so that you would basically package these in a unit and then have this really sleek way to like really scale these up. But I think for the you could sit here and then manually kind of update each one and test them, and it wouldn't take you longer than like a half an hour to build out 10 of these modules in a whole little learning environment, and some sort of title sequence and Anyway, yeah. Yeah, and you can always swap out the horizon too if you want. If you were like, let me put pyramids in a summer dusk pyramids, and then the one thing that you'll notice is that if you've kind of tuned the glow effect to the moon, it might not be everything you want. It might be too bright or not bright enough in daytime and stuff like that. And the cameras have auto exposure on them, so if you get in very close to something bright, it's kind of like the iris of your eye. It'll ratchet down the auto exposure, but that should be enough to fully get you started. And feel free to contact me at any moment to ask questions. Enjoy.